Welcome, first graders, to the Dallas Independent School District STEM Environmental Education Center. We'd like to give a special welcome to the students at Edward Teich Elementary who are with us today. This is a blue ribbon school, so it is especially exciting to have you with us. We wish you could be here in person, but since you can't, we're going to do our best to make you feel like you're here during a virtual field trip. If you are watching this and have not registered for this trip yet, you can still do that by going to www.tiny.cc/EEC register. And there you can get yourself or your class registered for this field trip. We just use that information for our attendance purposes. And today's field trip is going to be about properties of soil. During this virtual field trip, students will discover that the natural world includes rocks, soil, and water that can be observed in cycles, patterns, and systems. Students will observe and compare components of soil by size, texture, and color. So we're going to start off by giving you an introduction to soil that'll be led by Miss Nash. Next, we're going to observe, compare, describe, and sort soil with Mrs. Fuller. Third, you're going to see organisms that live in the soil with me. And last but not least, you're going to see how to set up a vermicompost with worms and leaf litter with Ms. Ramirez. While we're doing all of that, you can ask us questions, and we encourage you to ask questions. But since this is a virtual field trip, the way you ask questions is by going to www.tiny.cc/EEC-question-answer. And once you'll get there, you'll fill out a super short form to ask us any questions you have related to properties of soil. You can ask as many questions as you like, and we will do our best to answer all of them in the time that we have with you this morning. So let me stop sharing my screen here and turn it over to Miss Nash, who's going to get us started with that introduction to soil.
Welcome to my classroom, students. Today we're going to be thinking about soil, or otherwise known as dirt, but we're going to call it soil today because we're being scientists. Now, it's important and we don't appreciate it enough. We walk around on it every day. We don't think about the soil. We build our houses on it. We use it to grow plants. Plants need soil, most plants do, so they grow, their roots are down in the soil. And we eat those plants, other animals do too. You can see these roots here, okay? See how they went down into the soil. Some of them are even still hanging onto the soil. The roots get their water out of the soil, they get minerals and other nutrients from the soil, and that helps them grow. And we all know that we need plants. We need them, and so do the other animals. Now, sometimes we can find where animals have been living in the soil. If you go to a park in a kind of a damp, wet place, you might see something like this. I found these right out here. And when they were wet, when I found them, I sliced them off and I let them dry. And it's the home, it was the home of a small creature called a crawdad or crayfish. They're actually a cousin of the lobster, but they're smaller. And they live underground. And the amazing thing here is that when I let it dry, it became hard like a rock, because our soil here has a lot of clay in it. And when it dries, it becomes very hard. Clay is the stuff we make flower pots out of. It makes a good home for a crawdad way underneath. And me too, boys and girls, I'm a tarantula puppet. Tarantula puppet. But if you ever see a tarantula, remember that they don't hurt you, but they live in a burrow, a home underground. And they come out at night and they go walking across the soil looking for insects for food. Okay, really interesting. So lots of animals who use the soil as a home. You might not think of a turtle as being an animal that would dig a hole and live in it, but actually, our little friend the box turtle here is a good digger. See those big claws on those feet? They are digging feet. And they dig a nest to lay eggs, and they also dig a burrow underground. And they spend the hot summer underground and the cold winter down in their burrow. Because underground, the temperature is more or less constant. So in the summertime, it's cooler, and in the wintertime, it's warmer. Pretty clever, eh? And everyone's favorite. of course, is our friend Red, the rat snake. Now, snakes are really amazing. They lost their legs. They don't have any legs anymore. But that body, that long, narrow body, can go down those twisty, tiny burrows hunting. So there's the rat snake, and they hunt rodents mostly. But those prairie dogs could also be dinner for a big one too. Okay. So pretty amazing animals that are really well adapted for going underground. Thank you, Ed. Let's look at a few other animals that can live underground. There we go. So many animals, look at all the different animals, even birds like that kingfisher or an owl can live underground. They live, they feed, they hunt, they hide, or they nest under the ground. And there are lots of different reasons they do that. You might think about some of the reasons you can think of why they would like to live underground. One of the most common ones we have around here is that one on top, the 9-banded armadillo. You might see one in your garden or in your park, and they've got those big feet for digging. See those big claws on those feet? They dig for worms in the ground to eat, and they also dig a burrow. The one on the bottom is the giant armadillo from South America. They are enormous, but they also dig a giant burrow. And then, of course, the mole, I'm almost completely blind now, but look at those big claws for digging. And they're tunneling through looking for yummy worms. Mm-mm-mm. The prairie dog digs a big, like, extensive, like an apartment house burrow. There's lots and lots of prairie dogs in it. And there's one animal, that ferret there, the black-footed ferret, only eats prairie dogs. Okay. And look at the little short legs they have so they can go down that burrow hunting. In the desert, when it's really hot, lots of animals like to burrow underground. It's cooler, like the burrowing owl. We have those out in West Texas. The tarantula I mentioned, and that fennec fox with those enormous ears to help keep them cool. In cold places, all animals also like to live underground because they can sleep and they can even hibernate in a burrow. It's warmer there when the snow falls. The black and white one, there's a badger, kind of big and fierce. And the one on the right is the groundhog. We don't have those here in Texas, but you may have heard about them for Groundhog Day. They hibernate underground and they wake them up for Groundhog Day. One of the strangest animals on the planet. You may have heard of the naked mole rat. They spend their whole lives underground. Those big teeth there, the big rodent teeth, they're rats. And they use those big teeth to eat plant roots underground. Then the babies there are born hairless, but a regular rat, their babies look like that when they're born, but they soon grow lovely fur. But the mole rat never does because they don't have to stay warm. Okay. And I guess their fur would just get full of dirt. So pretty interesting. So it's interesting thing to learn about different animals that live underground. And if you have any questions, Mr. Broughton would be glad to answer.
Thank you, Ms. Nash. The question that came up was, what different types of soil are there? And you can see here is some sand that I have, and that's one type of soil. And here is some potting soil that I have, and that's another kind. And if you put them together, you can see they are very different. And there are other types of soil too that we can observe and describe the properties of and compare and sort. But we're going to do that right now with Mrs. Fuller.
Well, I'm glad you asked about the different kinds of soil. I have a poster here. There are 12 orders of soils in the soil taxonomy. That means the way that they're listed. And they are the alpha sols, the andisols, the iridosols. The iridosols are the ones you find in the desert because they're arid. Entosols, gelisols, histosols, those are the ones you find in wetlands. Mollisols, those are prairie soils. Oxasols, spotosols, utilisols, insectisols and vertisols. Our soil here in our area is a vertisol. It's called Houston Black. It's the Texas state soil, yay. And our area is called the Blackland Prairie. You see this gray part right here that goes down like this? That's the Blackland Prairie. It's the most endangered ecosystem in North America. Only 1% remains in its original condition. This is what it used to look like for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, a tall grass prairie. And now we've got it covered with schools and houses and churches and stores and all kinds of highways and roads. But this is what it looks like in the ground. Our soil is very deep here, 80 inches deep. And that's because the roots of these tall grasses held it in place for thousands and thousands of years. You saw the plant Miss Nash showed you with the roots that had the dirt clods on it. The roots of these plants can go 10, even 15 feet deep, held this soil in place. Now, our slope here is very level, so there's not a lot of erosion. So the soil stacked up, and the reason why it's so dark is all the humus or the decayed material that added to it, and because it didn't wash away, it helped our soil be very, very dark. I'm going to show it to you on a shovel. Hold on. There is our soil, Houston Black. Can you see that? I'm going to put it down because it's heavy. Our soil is very, very clayey. It's full of clay. Now, this is some soil I bought. This soil is loamy. It falls apart really easily. It has a lot of sand and a lot of silt, but mostly decomposed plant material. Our soil has a huge amount of clay in it. Now, when clay is wet, it's real sticky and it'll stick to the plow, and it's hard to plow the land. I will put that down. I'm getting Blackland Prairie all over my table here. But when it dries out, this is the one I showed the kids yesterday. When it dries out, it's very, very hard. Let me show you. Look at this. It's like that pot that Ms. Nash showed you. It's hard as a rock. So our soil, when it's wet, is very sticky. And when it's dry, it's hard as a rock. But the sticky part is good because the sticky part keeps the good nutrients, the minerals stuck in the soil, things like calcium and magnesium and phosphorus and potassium, things like that. But it's not so sticky that it keeps it away from the plants. So it keeps the minerals here, but it allows the plants to use the minerals. So it's a really good process. Now, every soil can be separated into 3 different size fractions. The first size is sand. So I'm going to show you a little card. The scientists who study soils are called podologists. And they can carry this around their necks. He's got that long string. And they can look at the sand size particles in the soil. Now, these 3 big ones here, this one over here says subangular, and that means it's pointy. And this one's sub-rounded, which means it's more roundy. And this one's well-rounded. So it's like real round pebbles, not pokey ones. But these other 2 up here, they're also coarse sand. Coarse means large. So we've got all kinds of coarse sand that can be in soils. Here are 2 medium sizes of sand. And then it's down here, we have fine sand. It's nice to touch it. It's very, very soft. And at the very bottom is what we call silt. And silt is like powdered rock. It's real tiny. So the 3 size fractions are sand, silt, and the last one is clay. And our soil has lots and lots of clay. And that's why it's so hard. And it's made from clay because it's from the parent material. The parent material is the rock that was made during the Cretaceous period, about 125 million years ago. And so it's got a lot of clay and marl in it. And when it decomposes, when it breaks down into these tiny, tiny little particles, it makes up our soil, which makes our soil hard to plow, but it's rich, and it's really hard when it dries out. And of course, you know our climate. We've got hot, dry summers, and then we have mild winters. So the climate helps um, form the soil also. And then we have the organisms. Now, the organisms are being covered by Ms. Nash, Mr. Broughton, and Ms. Ramirez. So I'm just going to focus on the abiotic part. And we also know that there's air and water in soil. Ms. Nash told you that. Okay. And the next, and I told you that our slope is very gentle. We're essentially flat here, so it doesn't roll away. Like if we were on a mountain, it would roll away. It's flat here, so it stays. And the other one is time. And we've had thousands and thousands of years for our soil to build up and to grow and to become very fertile. So it's very good soil. Remember, of the different kinds of soils, our soil is a vertisol. That's the one down there that's really dark, and it makes good farming soil. So soils are fascinating. I recommend them for a study. And if you have any other questions about soils, Mr. Broughton will be glad to answer them. Thank you. Good day.
Thank you, Mrs. Fuller. The question that came in was, how many layers does soil have? And that depends on what kind of soil you're looking at. Some types of soil have more layers than others. So you'd have to just really do some research on where the soil is that you're looking, and then find out how many layers it has. All right, now I'm going to share my screen here so we can get started looking at some of the organisms that live in and on soil. And hopefully this video will play. There we go. And so you might be wondering why I'm showing you chickens, because chickens don't live in the soil, but they are eating bugs that live in the soil. And they are excellent at finding those bugs. I watch those chickens hunt for bugs every day, and I hadn't thought much of it until this virtual field trip, because I tried to find some bugs in the soil and I couldn't do it. And look at them, they're just finding them all over the place. And you can see here's our female turkey. That is Mrs. Gobbles finding bugs in the soil there. This white rooster is Prince. He's finding some bugs. This other little white one is another rooster. The rest of those chickens are hens, but they're all excellent at spotting bugs that live in and on the soil and eating them. That's where they get most of their food each day, and they help keep the bug population down by our building. So they're proving that there's bugs in the soil, because I looked and looked and I could not find any of them. Now let me see if I can get to my next video here. There we go. All I could find was ants on Saturday when I was out here looking for bugs in the soil. So there's an ant hill. You might be able to see a couple of ants on it now, but I'm about to disturb that ant hill, and you're going to see plenty of ants come out of it. There they come. So I am not a big fan of ants because they bite, but ants do help the soil. They do what's called aerating the soil, which means they dig their tunnels through the soil, and air can then go into those tunnels, and soil needs to have air in it so plants can live more easily in it. It also loosens the soil up so plants' roots can grow through it. If it weren't for organisms like ants digging up the soil, aerating it, the soil would become very compact, and then plants' roots would have a very difficult time growing through that. And let's see if we can go to the next slide here. And so what else lives in the soil are earthworms. Earthworms do a similar job that ants do. They tunnel through the soil, and they're always turning it over and mixing it up and keeping it aerated and keeping it from becoming too compact or too pressed together. so that plants can grow easily in the soil. And here we have some red wigglers. They're similar to an earthworm, but they are smaller. They do a similar job of earthworms and ants in that they uh, tunnel through the soil, keep it mixed up, keep it from becoming compact. They red wigglers are actually excellent decomposers, so they're breaking down that dead plant and animal matter and turning that into new soil for plants to live. And then we have slugs that live usually on the soil. Not they don't go. I don't think they tunnel into it, definitely not like a worm does. And they are another kind of decomposer. I don't like those in our vegetable garden because they eat plants, and we want to eat the plants or be able to feed plants to our animals. So um, I try to keep slugs out of our vegetable garden, but in the post oak preserve, they can live just fine out there because they help break down dead plant matter. And it's similar to a slug, but not exactly the same, are snails. Uh, they have that hard shell on them, so you can see that they're not like they're similar to a slug, but they're not exactly like a slug. So if you see one that has no shell, that's a slug, or if it has a shell, then that's a snail. And like they um, live on the ground. They help decompose things, but again, I try to keep them out of our vegetable garden because they eat the plants too, and we don't want that happening. Then we also have pill bugs. I'm sure you've seen those around your school or home. They live all over the place. Uh, they really don't harm anything, so I leave them where they are. And they actually are good decomposers, so they're a good thing to add to a compost pile. And they're especially good because they eat little bits of metal that are in that compost pile. There's actually metals in some of our foods. Your body needs a little bit of metal to be healthy, but uh, metal that you're throwing away in the form of food scraps could get into our water supply and contaminate it. And these little pill bugs help keep those metals out. So they do a really good job of decomposing and keeping our water a little bit cleaner. And there's a couple more ants. Uh, they again help aerate the soil, although they do bite. So I steer clear of those if they are in our vegetable garden. I have a tough time getting them out. So I usually do a little work near where they are, move away, do some work somewhere else, let them calm down, and then go back and work again. Because if you stay by them, they will find you and bite you. And another organism that lives in the soil is a centipede. This part right here, cent means 100, like there's 100 cents in a dollar. But a centipede doesn't really have 100 legs. They have a lot of legs. If you counted up all these legs, though, I don't believe you would get to 100. There's not 100 legs on that centipede. Then there's also beetles, all kinds of different types of beetles. There are all sorts of different colors that live in soil. Uh, some are harmful to plants that we have, like there's a squash bug that eats our zucchini and squash in our garden that I have to keep on top of and kill all the time. This is not a squash bug. This is another type of beetle that doesn't really harm anything. So you just leave those alone. And then there's grubs that live underground in the soil. Those are the larvae of a beetle. Although I don't think these grubs are the larvae of the beetle I just showed you. I believe these will turn into June bugs, which you've probably seen flying around in the summertime. They are not good to have in your soil, though, because they eat the roots of the grass and they could kill your grass. And then we also have bacteria that live in soil. This is a picture taken with a microscope of bacteria. Bacteria is too small for you to see without a microscope, but there's lots and lots of bacteria in the soil, which are breaking down plant and animal matter. So it's good to have bacteria in your soil. You do need it. You wouldn't be able to get rid of it anyway if you tried. And if you're looking for even more organisms that live in the soil, if you visit this video on YouTube, it's from the California Academy of Sciences. They'll show you even more things, especially the microscopic things that live in the soil beneath our feet. I'm not going to show you that video though, because I'll let you watch it for yourself. But what I am going to show you is some of the live organisms we have here. I just need to share my other screen here, and hopefully it works. There we go. All right. So this first organism I am going to show you is a pill bug. And let me see if I can find one that's going to crawl around a little bit. These guys are kind of curled up in a ball, because when you disturb them, that's their defense, is to curl up into a little ball there. So maybe he'll start moving around in a minute when he realizes he's not in any danger. You can see his antennas moving there. He's trying to walk. These are actually not bugs, even though we call them pill bugs. They're a crustacean, and they are the only land crustacean. Other crustaceans live underwater. But even though these live on land, they still breathe with gills. So it's got to be moist where they live, or their gills will dry out and they'll die. And this is harmless to hold. They can't hurt you. There, he's finally crawling around. He realizes I'm not gonna hurt him. And the only thing I would say, if you do hold a pill bug, is wash your hands afterwards, because they've been in the dirt, and you don't want them to make your hands dirty. I mean, my hand's a little dirty now, but I'll get it washed. See if I can get a little closer here for you to see. There. Yeah, maybe I'm too well, anyway, let's bring out the next one. Sometimes the camera doesn't like to focus so well. So that was a pill bug. Now let's look at a red wiggler. Ooh, and he is doing exactly what his name says. He is wiggling around. Let me try to get him in the camera there so you can see him. He jumped right out of my hand for a second there. There, he finally calmed down. They don't like being in the light. But there you can see. Let me see if I can get it focused. Oh, he is really wiggly today. There's a little better view of him. Finally calmed down. I think he maybe realized too, I'm not going to hurt him. They are also harmless to us, so you can hold one, but you can see how dirty my hand is getting now from holding this one red wiggler. So I'm going to have to wash my hands right after I'm done with this. But there's a little view of him. So they're not very big. They're pretty small worms, especially compared to earthworms, although there's worms that are smaller than red wigglers. And the last organism that I'm going to show you is a land snail here. So there you can see it's got kind of a spiral shape to its shell. It's got some soil stuck to its shell because it was in the soil or on the soil. And his head is not coming out because they're very shy. When you pick them up, they go inside their shell for protection. If I set this down and leave him alone for a while, he'll come out and eat this lettuce. This is their favorite food to eat. I know they come out at night because when I put lettuce in their terrarium for them, the next day some of that lettuce has been eaten, and they're the only organisms that live in there. So it's definitely the snails that are eating that lettuce. So that is it for animals that live in soil. You're going to see actually some more though with Mr. Mirez in her vermicompost. So let me stop sharing my screen here so she can start her presentation.
Hello, Hello, my name is Ms. Ramirez, and in this segment, we're going to be observing, comparing, and describing soil within a vermicompost. So you might be asking, what exactly is a vermicompost? A vermicompost is simply just a box where I have hundreds of worms. So vermi means worms, and my vermicompost is just a box with lots of worms that I have to help break down my food waste that I don't want anymore. So worms are very important because they help to decompose the leftover food that I don't want to throw away, but they also help to decompose dead leaves and dead animals. So decompose just means to break down. So for example, if you've ever gone outside, you probably see a whole bunch of leaves outside on the ground. Eventually, those big leaves will start to decompose, they'll break down or turn into super tiny pieces that will get incorporated or put back into our soil. So decompose just means to break down into small pieces. And those leaves and dead animals and dead plants and our food waste, they get decomposed or broken down by things called decomposers. So decomposers are just living things like worms, some bugs like Mr. Broughton showed you, things like mushrooms and fungi, and the super tiny stuff like bacteria. All of these living things help to break down or decompose all of our leftover trash and our food and animal waste. So what we're gonna do, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen with you guys, and we're gonna take a look inside my vermicompost. So I'm going to share my screen with y'all, and it might take just a second to connect my iPad so that y'all can see what I'm seeing. So let me get that screen share started. Let's see if it's gonna pick up my Zoom, and I think I'm ready to go. So let's take a look. I'm gonna walk you guys over to my vermicompost. So here is my vermicompost, and you can see it's just a black box with holes in there, and those holes are so that our worms can breathe. So just like you guys need air and oxygen to breathe, so do our worm friends. And then also it's black because the worms don't like the sunlight. So think about it. Whenever you go outside, do you ever see worms just lying around out in the sun? So not really. You actually have to dig for the worms because they're hiding in the dirt. So let's take a look at my worm box or my vermicompost. So these are my pet worms. And since they're my pets, I feed them certain things. So I feed them grass, I feed them leaves, I feed them fruits and vegetables. So at home, if I buy fruits and vegetables like apples and bananas and lettuce, if they go bad and they start to smell bad, I obviously don't want to eat them anymore. So instead of throwing them away, I will actually feed them to my worms inside my vermicompost. So let's take a look inside. So as you're looking, make some observations. What do you see and what do you notice? So do you see any leftover food? And do you see any worms or any living things? So right away, I can see I have some leftover cucumbers that went bad that I threw in there. I have some potato skins that I threw in there since I didn't want to eat them. And I'm going to dig around. Can you guys spot any worms hiding in that nice soil? So I actually see a few worms. So there's one right here and one right here. These are red wigglers. So they're smaller than the earthworm that you guys saw earlier today. But this box has hundreds of worms that are hiding right now because they don't like that light. But again, a vermicompost is important and good to have because these worms will break down the leaves and the food, and they give us this nice, rich soil. And we can actually use this for our plants in our garden because it has lots of nutrients, things that help plants grow. So think about the color and the texture of the soil that you're seeing here. Now I'm lucky since I can actually touch it. I know that it feels wet or moist, and it's this nice, rich black color. So I'm gonna go ahead and, I have some more stuff to show you guys. I went for a walk yesterday in our forest, and I saw a couple of things on my walk. The first thing I saw on my walk was lots of leaves, and I decided to dig. So when I saw my leaves, this is the first layer that I saw in the forest. So make some observations. What do you guys notice about the size of the stuff in the top layer of my soil. So this is the top layer. Now look at the second layer. I dug a little bit. So underneath all this big stuff, this is my second layer that I found. Notice the size of the stuff in the second layer. Is it smaller or bigger than the stuff on this layer? And then I dug even more. I dug even deeper. And this is what the soil looked underneath. So look at the size difference. This is the top soil with the big pieces of leaves and the big branches and twigs from trees. You dig a little more and the pieces get smaller, so they get broken. And then the last layer, look how super tiny the pieces are. They got broken down even more. Now, if you were to keep digging, what do you think the soil underneath would eventually look like if you kept digging even further? So something interesting to think about is what's in our soil. So we know in our forest, we know that leaves are in our soil, but what else do you think is inside of our soil? So some other things that make up our soil would be things like water, and we get water in the soil when it rains. Things like rocks. Some soil is very rocky. Now I know these rocks look big, but over time, things like animals, people, the water and the wind will eventually weather or break down these rocks into super tiny pieces, and it actually becomes part of our soil. Other things in our soil we already went over, the leaves and sticks, so the remains of dead plants and trees, those make up our soil as well. And then something people don't really realize, our soil is also made out of dead animals. So when animals die, their feathers or their fur, their bones will eventually become part of our soil as well. So here we have some animal fur and some bones that make up soil. And then we also have some snake skin. Eventually, if I left this stuff outside, it would also break down and be part of our soil outside as well. There's some bird feathers. Here's a cool skeleton of an animal I found outside as well. So if I were to leave these things outside, eventually over time, they too would break down and turn into super tiny pieces and become part of our soil. And then something else people don't realize, some of our soil also has animal poop or waste in it. So this is not real poop, it's actually a plastic replica, but it's coyote poop. Now in my backyard, I know a lot of my dirt or soil has a lot of my dog's poop in it. So that's why it's important if you're ever touching or playing in the dirt that you always wash your hands, because you never know what is making up that soil. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And then we're gonna look at a little video of the worms actually moving. So let me just wipe my hands really quick so I don't get my computer dirty. We're gonna share our screen and we're gonna look at some videos of the worms moving. So let me get that presentation started. And some guests that came inside of my worm bin, so I didn't put these things there. They just happened to find their way inside my worm bin. Some springtails, these super cute little insects. They're white and they're so tiny. And then these mites on the bottom. There's probably thousands of these super tiny mites inside my worm bin. Now I didn't put them there, but they're actually good to have in the worm bin because they help to break down all that stuff that I throw in there. And then also one time I put potatoes in there, some leftover potatoes, and they actually grew, they sprouted. So you can see how that soil is very good for plant growth. And then also sometimes I get some molds, some cool looking molds growing on some of the stuff that I throw in there. Now here's a little video of some of the worms and the soil that they're in. And I want you guys to be a good scientist. Use your eyes to make some observations. If you have a paper and pencil, maybe draw or even talk with somebody next to you about what you see or what you're observing. And also be on a lookout. See if you can find a worm cocoon. A worm cocoon is a little orange or yellow oval shaped dot, and it has worm eggs inside. So as I play the video, see if you can spot that. And there's also super tiny creatures crawling around the dirt. So see if you can find those as you watch the video. So you can see the worm, the red worm is moving. Think about, how do you think that soil feels if you touch it? Hopefully you guys found that egg. I'm gonna go ahead and show it to you. So this is the cocoon right here that's filled with some worm eggs. It's that little orange oval shaped thing right here. And then hopefully you guys were able to see some of those tiny little white springtails crawling around the video. There's some over here as well. So there's all sorts of tiny creatures inside a worm bin if you decide to create one at home or at school. And then here's a close-up of some of these springtails. So use your good scientist eyes to observe, see if you can find the springtails. So we're looking for tiny white things crawling around. They're harmless, so they're not hurting the worms when they're crawling on the worms. Again, they're good to have because they're decomposers. I'm gonna play it one more time, and this time I'm gonna show you where they are in case you missed it. So they're right here on this worm right here, and you can see there's probably about 5 or 6 of them crawling around. So it's really cool to look at these things under a microscope. So something about worms that y'all might not know is that worms have no teeth, so they can't chew their food. We have teeth, and that helps us chew our food to break it down into small pieces. Worms don't have teeth, so instead they have a special body part called a gizzard. You guys might have eaten gizzards during Thanksgiving. Turkeys and chickens have gizzards in them as well because they don't have teeth either. So the way a gizzard works, these worms and other animals like chickens will eat small things like rocks or sand, and they will eat it, and it goes inside the gizzard. When it's in the gizzard, the rocks or sand will mix with the food that the animal is eating, and the gizzard crushes it to make it into small pieces. So think of the gizzard as like crushing body part. It breaks down the food. And then in this picture, we have what people call black gold, and it's actually just worm poop. We call it worm castings. So because worms are good decomposers, whenever they release their waste or their poop, it actually has lots of nutrients in it that our plants need to grow. So if you take a look at this little picture of the black gold, describe the color, maybe the texture. So how do you think it feels, and the particle size? So are those small pellets, tiny pellets, big pellets? And then texture, I know y'all can't actually touch it, but I will tell you that stuff is really moist. Think of like a wet sponge when you touch it. And that stuff is great for plants to grow. And then here's a video, a time lapse of a pumpkin decomposing or breaking down into smaller pieces. This is a time lapse over about 2 months. So there's actually worms inside that box. And there's also other little decomposers in there as well. They're slowly starting to eat away at it and break it down. Eventually, that pumpkin will become so small that it will turn into pieces of that soil. So it's gonna incorporate into the soil in that box. So something cool that you guys can do, if you have like an apple or banana, just leave it outside and watch to see how it changes over time. And then the next thing we're gonna take a look at is a little video. Again, I went for a walk yesterday in our forest across the street, and it's leaf litter, so all the leaves on the ground. And think about what's gonna happen eventually to all these dead leaves and trees. So there's a dead tree that fell down. You can see all the leaves on the ground. Look at the size of those leaves on the top. And then I'm gonna just, here in a little bit, I'm gonna find a little spot and I'm gonna dig underneath, and then you guys can make comparisons. Where do you think those sticks came from? What were they once a part of? So those sticks and branches were once part of the trees. So you can see as you dig under the pieces, the leaves, they get smaller. And I even see a snail in that video. That's another decomposer. I'm gonna fast forward just a little bit so we can see some more. So you can see the smaller particle size soil underneath. Think of the colors and textures of this rich soil. So this soil will probably look different than the soil in your backyard. The soil in the Post Oak Preserve has lots of leaf remains because there's lots of trees. And then there's a little worm, some sort of larva that I found out there. And my last thing for you guys is a challenge. It's a scavenger hunt. I want to see if you can find 2 different soils. So go outside and see what soils you can find. Describe their color and their texture. So how do they feel? And then describe the particle size. Are they super small pieces or big, rocky, chunky pieces? And then also see if you can find 2 different decomposers. So Mr. Broughton went over some decomposers with you, and here's some other pictures as well. These 2 pictures are mushrooms that I actually found out here. So those are also decomposers. They help to break down all that dead stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and we're going to give it back to Mr. Broughton, and he's going to answer any questions that y'all might have.
Thank you, Mr. Ramirez. I'm going to share my screen to do a quick recap of what we did today. So today's field trip was all about properties of soil. During this virtual field trip, students discovered that the natural world includes rocks, soil, and water that can be observed in cycles, patterns, and systems. Students observed and compared components of soil by size, texture, and color. So we got that introduction to soil with Ms. Nash. Next, we observed, compared, described, and sorted soil with Mrs. Fuller. Then you saw organisms that live in soil and the vermicompost with the worms and leaf litter with Mr. Ramirez. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate you taking the time to learn about properties of soil with us. We hope you enjoyed this virtual field trip, and you can let us know whether you did or not by going to www.tiny.cc/EEC feedback and filling out a short feedback form for us. We hope to see you after the winter break for our next virtual field trip for first grade. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.